So now I want to go over the life insurance sales flow process that I use for every single sales call that I get on now, no matter, if I'm selling IULs or whole life or term. So whatever sort of life insurance that you sell, instant coverage, fully underwritten, whatever, mortgage protection, does not matter. This will apply to that, and this will help you close way more deals, because the people that go into a sales call with no structure, with no format, just, a rough idea of where they need to go, are shooting themselves in the foot, because if you don't have a structure to follow along, the customer or the client will 9 times out of 10 dictate the flow of the call. Your job as a professional is to make sure that you maintain frame and dictate where the conversation goes, so that you, at the end, have the authority to close them. Because if they don't respect you, if they're controlling the conversation, you have a very low likelihood of being able to close them at the end, because you are not the authority figure. You're not the doctor. You're not the lawyer in the conversation, right? When you go to a doctor's office, or, to a lawyer, you're not the one, telling them where you're going to go next or how to do this or that. The doctor or the lawyer tells you exactly what we're going to do, what you're prescribed, what's going to go on. Okay. And that's it. So let's get into it. Oh, by the way, throughout this, though, I built this around IUL specifically, because that's what I mainly focus on these days. Even though, just like I was saying before, you can cherry pick and really still watch this entire thing, because the general sales process and the way you go about selling is exactly the same for no matter what sort of life insurance you sell. Okay, and I'll make it clear throughout the way as well. So the first part is obviously the introduction. Okay. So the start of the call should go something like this, right? Hey, is this Mark? Hey, Mark, this is Joshua, senior broker here at whatever insurance company you work for. I'm responding to the request that you sent in about setting up an IUL. Okay. So just to break that down, what I'm doing in the beginning is I'm addressing him by his first name. I'm not saying, Mr. Logan or Mr. whatever, because, you want to differentiate yourself from a general salesperson, right? So you want to be quick, to the point, but also the reason why I say something like senior broker, which is not a lie, I'm a broker here, I work with a lot of different companies. If you have a team underneath you, you can say something like supervisor. The reason you say something like that instead of just, agent or with FFL, whatever, or whatever insurance company you work for, the reason you want to be very specific about your sort of authority is because you want them to trust you immediately off the bat. You want to sound sharp. You want to be to the point. You don't want to be like another peon agent that has no idea whatever they're talking about. Okay. So I say their first name, my position. That is better than just a regular agent. Of course, don't lie here, but that's the framework you want to go about. Insert whatever insurance company you work for. And then I'm responding to the request that you sent in about setting up an IUL, a whole life policy, mortgage protection, whatever. So then next, what you want to do is you want to explain who you are, right? So once you get the introduction first part over, you want to explain who you are, right? So a senior broker, supervisor, whatever, and the fact that we work with almost every single A-rated insurance company in the nation, meaning I'm able to plug in your health information into our system, and it's going to scan through all of the top-rated insurance companies in the United States, such as Mutual of Omaha, National Life Group, Fidelity and Guarantee, etc. And then it's going to tell me which company is going to approve you and which company is going to give you the absolute lowest price for the most amount of coverage. Right? That's why people like working with us, because I'm the only guy you need to talk to. You don't need to hop on 20 of these different phone calls to figure out which company is going to give you the best price. Does that make sense? Okay, awesome. So the reason we do this is because we want to preemptively overcome the objection that typically comes down the road where they say, I want to talk to some other people, want to get some other quotes, all that kind of stuff. Because if you are a life insurance broker and if you work with a bunch of the best insurance companies in the nation, you can tell them this by saying, look, I'm not just one guy at one company. When I put in your information and when we talk about what you need, I'm looking at all the different companies to ascertain what company is going to give you the most amount of coverage for the best price and is going to be best according to your needs. By doing this, not only do you establish yourself as an authority figure, somebody that knows what they're talking about, somebody that can actually solve the problem, but you also establish yourself as somebody they can trust. Okay, so that's really the purpose of this there. Now, the next part of the call is the discovery. Okay, so you're going to ask them things like, what has you looking into life insurance? Okay, do you already have anything set up, or would this be your first policy? Okay, the purpose of this is to dig into what their motivation is for, looking for life insurance. Okay, so very important. Instead of just going into, yeah, this is, $500,000 for $200 a month, or, this is how the policy works. This is how, the cash value works, all this kind of stuff. You are doing yourself a disservice, and you're making it harder for you to sell them a policy if you do not first understand why they're even talking to you, because they may not even care about the cash value. So really dig into the death benefit. If they don't care about the death benefit, if they don't have a family, really focus on the cash value. However, still, as a general rule of thumb, I want you guys to know with IULs, you want to still focus on and really sell that the life insurance aspect of these IULs, not the cash value, because that's the cherry on top, right? Just to sweeten the deal once you've already sold them on solving their problem, right? The lack of insurance with your solution. And then also with these IULs and some, fully underwritten whole life policies, we sell them on the living benefits, right? That IULs have. And like I said, those fully underwritten whole lives, but only after we ask them, right, some pre-qualifying health information. Because the reason being is if we just sell them on, too much of the living benefits before, which are really incredible, the living benefits are amazing. If we sell them on those things before we know if they can even qualify, we might be shooting ourselves in the foot when we need to pivot to whole life, right? And it's very important we do this before quoting them, before explaining too deep. We really need to figure out what they can probably qualify for. And for this to really work, you guys need to study the underwriting guides so you know for each carrier what are typically big knockout problems, okay? So like I said, really dig deep here. This is very, very important. So you ask them, why now, right? Why now instead of 2 weeks ago or a month ago or, a year ago, 10 years ago? Why now? The reason you do this is because maybe they had a family member die, maybe a friend died, maybe, at work, say with truckers, maybe the truckers are telling them about, these IULs that are so amazing. You want to ask them these questions up front because you can use that as ammunition when you go to sell them, right? If their, mom just died and she didn't have life insurance, and now they're reaching out to you about life insurance, you really dig into that. You say, hey, man, I'm so sorry you had to go through something like that, right? I assume the reason you're speaking with me right now, and please tell me if I'm wrong, is that because you have kids, right? You want to make sure that they never have to go through what you just had to go through with your mom, right? Yes, 100%. That's what I'm looking for. That's why you want to ask questions, not for no reason, but to get ammunition that you can use when closing them, okay? Then you ask some questions like, what happens if they pass away tomorrow, right? Is the house paid off or the final expenses taken care of? What are your spouse's and or your family's monthly living expenses to maintain their standard of living, right? Because you ask them, what are their goals? They say, I want to make sure that for the next 10 years after I pass, that, I can let my family get back on their feet. I want them to still be able to maintain the same standard of living. I don't want them to have to, eat McDonald's every night. I want them to be able to enjoy life. Right? If that's what they say their goals are, perfect. You go into that. Okay. So really, and see, this is very important. A lot of times people, when you ask them, what happens if you pass away tomorrow? They'll say, I don't know. Or, it'll probably be bad for my family. Right? Yes, that's true. But it's so important that you make them dig really deep. Sometimes you're going to have to ask them 10 times before they finally tell you, yeah, my wife would probably have to move in with the in-laws or with her parents or with this or with that. Really dig deep here. It's extremely important because if they give you objections down the road, you can tie back to say, hey, you told me that your wife is going to be homeless if you don't get this policy. So what really is there to think about, right? Just as an example. So just like I said, you're going to be using all these things as ammunition when you go to close the deal. Okay. So really, really use this time to make it clear, not only to you, but also to them, why there is, in fact, a massive gap or problem that needs to be solved by getting life insurance. Okay. Just like I was saying, you don't do this by telling them directly. Instead, you get them to sell themselves on the life insurance by asking all of those previous questions and then tying down with something like this. Okay. So, Mark, I appreciate you, sharing that with me. So just so I'm fully understanding why you're looking for this, that if you passed away tomorrow, that your wife would need to sell the home, pick up a second job, move in with her parents, etc. And because of that, you're looking for life insurance to guarantee that your family is taken care of when you pass, correct? Okay, perfect. Now we're on the same page. Now we've kind of, we've established really a level playing field of, okay, this is exactly what happens. Not only do you know this, because as a professional, of course, you know these things, but you need them to really picture in their mind what happens if they don't get this set up. Okay, very important. Now we're going to move on to the next part. Also very important. This is the health pre-qualification. Okay. So you're going to ask them about their health. Okay. You're going to say, so Mark, right? Since life insurance eligibility and pricing is based on your age and your health, would you mind sharing if you have anything going on medically, or, if you have any history of high blood pressure, diabetes, cancer, stroke, kidney or liver problems, depression, anxiety, etc., anything whatsoever? Right. And by the way, the reason we do this, the reason we're so specific and list so many different medical conditions is because oftentimes people who are diabetic, overweight with high blood pressure, 5'9", 350 pounds, they'll say, yeah, I'm doing all right. Yeah, I'm pretty healthy. And if you're a regular agent that does not know you need to do this, especially if you're selling IULs, you're going to get, hit upside the head when you are on the application. You ask them their height and weight, and they say, yeah, I'm 5'9", 350. Oh, well, shoot, you can't, get an IUL. So very important, before you quote them on prices, before you really sell the product so much, you got to ask them these health questions first to make sure that you know what the game plan is going to be. Okay. And then after this, you're going to ask them, right, are you taking any medications, right? You don't need the dosages or anything specific yet. You just need to know what the disease or disorder is that they're taking the medication for. And again, the reason we do this is as like a second layer to protect yourself, because let's say if you ask them all those first things, right? No high blood pressure, no diabetes, no cancer, stroke, blah, blah, blah. But then you don't ask them the medical questions. Then you get to the application. You answer no. Then you get to the part about medications. They say, oh, I'm taking Norcos or whatever. Oh, well, what is that for? Yeah, I've got chronic pain in my back from arthritis. Oh, well, probably can't get an IUL then, as an example. Right. So the reason you do this is to make sure that any bases that you did not cover when asking about health is covered when you ask them about their medications, because once they share their medications, you're going to know everything that they have going on. Okay. So the next thing then, especially with IULs or fully underwritten whole life policies, because they are financial products, you got to ask them things like any felonies or DUIs in the last 10 years, right? Very important. Also things like, what is your current height and weight? Also, are you a smoker? And by the way, some carriers for certain products allow non-smoker rates only if they occasionally smoke cigars. So do your own research on this. I think F&G is one of those, and I think maybe another one off the top of my head, I can't remember right now. But look into this, because sometimes if they only smoke, cigars a few times a year, they can qualify for the non-smoker rates. Also, for certain products, like on Americo for their Final Expense Eagle Premier product, even if they are a smoker, if you ask them, hey, are you going to quit? They say, yeah, I'm going to quit. You can put no, and then it gives them non-smoker pricing for 4 years. And then if they actually end up quitting, smoking, they get to keep those prices. However, if they still continue to smoke, then it just, gets bumped up to the smoker pricing. So if they are a smoker, go to Americo for whole life. Really, really good policies there. So next then, right, once you have figured out what is going on with their health, you figured out, okay, they can probably get an IUL just based on these questions. Next, you're going to go on to the education. So this is where you really educate your, client on either, whatever different product type that you are going to be selling them now. So the different types of life insurance policies and how they work if you buy general life insurance leagues. So if you just bought, a whole final expense life insurance product, you want to educate them on exactly how term works, how whole life works, only what they can qualify for. Or you're going to educate them on if the lead you bought is an IUL lead, right? You're going to explain now how that IUL works. But again, only if they did not have any immediate knockout conditions that prevent them from getting an IUL. Okay, so in bold letters, make sure you do not educate them on something they cannot be approved for. Only do this if they specifically ask. Okay, so like let's say if they ask about IULs, then you can tell them about it, but then you got to be truthful and say, hey, you probably can't get it. Here's why. Okay, so make sure, by the way, when you do this, when you explain exactly how the product works, you want to clearly tie each part of your explanation back to their needs and how this is actually going to solve their specific problem that they told you about. So for example, let's say they're a trucker. Let's say they're looking for an IUL. Let's say based on your preliminary health check, they can probably get it. you're going to start to educate them on why IULs are so amazing, especially for truckers. Because, hey, look, let's say if you have a heart attack on the road, or let's say, you develop chronic arthritis and you can no longer perform 2 or more of the daily living activities, such as bathing, eating, dressing, etc., you could be entitled to up to 75 or 80% of the death benefit while you're living, completely lump sum and 100% tax-free while you're alive, that you can spend on anything, not just medical bills. And sometimes that will blow their minds. They'll be like, oh my gosh, so you're telling me if I'm not driving, because we both know, right, that you're not making money if the wheels aren't turning. You're telling me that if I can't work, like let's say if I have a heart attack, or let's say I get in a car accident, I'm in critical condition in the hospital, that this would pay me money while I'm alive? Yes. And the reason being is because of the terminal, critical, and chronic illness riders that are common carrier riders associated with IULs. Okay. So just like I said, let's say they can't get the IUL, but we're talking now about a permanent death benefit. They told you in the beginning that their goals were to make sure that, hey, I have $100,000 left on the home, and it's so important to me that my family is able to live in the home that I raised my children in. And I do not want them having to sell the home and going through that whole process after they pass. I want them to live and be able to mourn and be able to, spend time processing what just happened, compared to having to go to work the next day to pay for themselves or, pay for their life. Because they said that was their goal, you're going to clearly tie each part of your explanation about the death benefit, the permanent death benefit. Hey, Mark, no matter how, when, or where you die, you are 100% guaranteed, besides suicide in the first 2 years for most carriers, to have this policy pay out to your family 100% tax-free and lump sum after you pass. This will guarantee that after you die, the home will 100% be paid off so that your family can still live in the home. And then whatever is left over, they can use to continue to pay for their standard of living. They can still go to the movies when they want. They can still hang out, go to the beach. They can still, spend time with each other. All these things. When you educate somebody, you need to very clearly make them understand why this product is the perfect solution for the problem that they have. And this is why earlier on in the call, we went so deep and made them really articulate exactly why they need this, because now you can use what they said as ammo to really drive home why they need this to then close them. Okay. So the next, we're going to go to the needs analysis. Okay. This is also very important, because this is, especially with very logical people, this is how you really tie down the real numbers of what they actually need, compared to just some arbitrary, I want $250,000. Okay. This is where you break down the numbers, okay, of what they need. So this is where you can, now get into the specifics of exactly how much they need and how much they can afford in relation to the goals that they've shared with you. So by doing this, not only do you put a real non-arbitrary number in front of them, but now you've built specific figures around their goals that you will use when actually quoting them. Right. So people often go way too fast over this part, because first you need to really tie down exactly how much they need, so that when you give them the price, overcoming the I need to think about it objection becomes very easy. Because this is because you can be honest and direct with them when you ask, right, well, what is it that you need to think about? Because you and I both know that if you die, you have a $200,000 mortgage that will need to be paid for, because your wife does not have a job. So either she's going to need to get a second job, take out a loan, or sell the home. And just to make sure, you said that you don't want any of those things to happen, correct? Okay. So what really, John or Mark, you can be honest with me. What is it that you need to think about? 9 times out of 10, then, because you've been so clear about everything, they will then give you the real objection, which is not I need to think about it. It's more of, this is a little bit too expensive, right? And then that's where you can kind of, to be a little bit more assumptive, you can ask, hey, obviously you and I both know that you need this, right? They'll say yes once you've gotten to this point. Okay. So it's not that you need to think about it. What I'm really hearing is that we just need to figure out what plan makes sense. And most of the time when I speak with people, if they don't say yes immediately right off the bat, it means that the numbers that I'm telling them are a little bit too much, because, I'm not in the business of selling people something they don't need or can't afford. I'm in the business of making sure that when we get off the phone today, you are 100% confident that you made the right decision for your family. Again, building trust, being relatable, building rapport, and then tying it to the actual objection. So John, I know you said $400 a month. It's a little bit, too much. What would be something comfortable for you? Okay, 250. They'll tell you a number, whatever. And then You go, okay, well, for 250, we can make sure that, this need is taken care of. Maybe we can't, take care of the mortgage and this and that and the other, but hey, we can take care of just the mortgage or just this, right? And by doing that, you still are making it very clear that this solves their problem while also being financially comfortable to make sure that this is something they can afford, to again make sure that you don't get a chargeback. Because if you don't do this part, it's very easy for a hard time to come around, a hard month where things are tight. They say, oh, I don't need this life insurance. However, if you do this correctly and really get them to understand why they are doing this, when that tough month comes around, when things are tight, or if they think about, hey, why do I need this life insurance? I want to cancel it. They're going to remember, well, man, if I cancel this, Mary's going to have to do X, Y, and Z, or whatever the reason was again. So this is very, very important. Okay. So just like I said, right, this will give you the ability to use their words and goals against them. Just like I said, using the ammunition from before when trying to close them, because you can always go back to when you ask them, what happens if we don't get this set up? And since you already discussed that in depth, they cannot lie to you. And if they lie to you, you can call them on their bullshit. Okay. And they'll respect you even more for it most of the time. Maybe 1% of the time they'll hang up on you, but you don't want to sell them anyway. So next now is you're going to go to quoting. Okay. This is where you bring up the quoting tool and you prepare 3 different options. Very important. Okay. You prepare one that is exactly in the range of what they need, one that is a little bit over, and one that is a little bit under. Okay, so this will then allow you to pitch options instead of a yes or no close. Okay, and then just like I said before, right, make sure that you tie each of these options to their exact specific goals and how each specific option will actually help them in relation to those goals. Okay, so like let's say if you talked about everything, and the most important thing is that we get the mortgage taken care of. Okay, let's say their mortgage is $250,000, right? We're going to say, okay, here's first off, you're going to make a plan for, call it 300,000. You're going to make an option for 250,000, which was the main goal. Then you're going to make one for, say, 200,000, right? Right within their budget ranges. And by the way, I'm not sure if I put it in here, but just as a general rule of thumb, guys, you do not want to be selling people a monthly premium that is over 5, max maybe 7% of their monthly income. The reason being is because if you sell them anything bigger every single month, for example, if somebody makes $4,000 a month, okay, pre-tax, and you sell them on a policy that's $400 a month, first off, we got to take out taxes. Okay, so now they're left with whatever, $3,000, if they're a business owner, whatever. And just for sake of argument, they're left with $3,000. And then after that, they got to pay for their mortgage, which is another $1,000. So now they're left with $2,000. Then they got to pay for everything else. And at the end of the month, they're only left with $700 that they typically put into savings. But then now they have another $400 bill that's going to be taken out of their account every single month. Typically, when you do that, that's very likely to then be a chargeback because they cannot afford it. So it's extremely important that really you go no higher when quoting somebody 5% of their income. Okay. And typically, especially if you're talking to business owners that have good months, bad months, whatever, typically you want to go for a conservative month, 5% max of a conservative month for their income. Okay. So now going back to this, right? You prepare 3 options so that you don't have a yes or no. You have which one is best. Okay. You have one that's a little bit over their needs, exactly on their needs, and then one that's a little bit below. Okay. So that you have some room to play. Next, now we're going to go into the close. Okay. This is, of course, where the money's made. So very, very important. Okay. So Mark, out of these 3 options, okay, which one do you believe is going to be the best one to protect your family without taking food off the table? And again, the reason we word it this way is because you want to come across as somebody that is on their team. You don't want to be another salesperson that's just trying to sell them something. Okay. That's why I like to sprinkle in very sparingly, because you don't want to overuse these things. But you want to say things like, look, I'm not in the business of trying to sell you something you don't need. I'm on your team. I'm here for you. Things like that, because you want them to feel like they can trust you. And if you're a real professional, they should be able to trust you. Never, ever take that for granted, and never, ever take advantage of the trust that these people give you, because this is extremely, very important. When somebody dies, a life insurance policy can be the difference between their family being homeless or their family being able to keep the lights on. So take this very seriously. Take yourself and consider yourself as a professional for which you are, just like a doctor, just like a lawyer, just like whoever else. Okay. So if they pick one, right, you're going to solidify by saying, okay, great. So you're positive that, the $125 a month is going to be 100% comfortable for you, correct? Okay, great. The reason we do this is because, again, you want to make sure that whatever they end up choosing, they are 100% rock solid on, because you don't want them to get off the call and then tomorrow they're going to be like, that's a little bit too much, cancel, free look, right? Charge back. Okay. Very important that, again, you tie it to the needs. You get them to understand what it's for. You get them to tell you, yes, I need this. Yes, I'm comfortable with this. Yes, I can 100% afford it no matter what for the rest of my life. Okay. Once you've done that, you move on. You go straight into the application, be super quick. The second they give you something, like the second you confirm with them, the second you tie down, you move on to the application. You should already have things pulled up, because if you sit there and pull it up now and blah, 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 maybe the dog starts barking, maybe the baby starts crying, maybe they start saying, oh man, well, I've got dinner. Can we just do the application another time? And then you got to start dealing with objections. Be quick, be assumptive. The second they say, yes, it's comfortable, perfect, we're going to fill out the application right now. Okay. Again, very important that you want to hold throughout the entire conversation with the quoting, with the sales, with the application, everything is be extremely assumptive. Do not ask for their permission to move on to the application. You say, okay, boom, we're going to do this. And you're the doctor. You're the one that leads the conversation. So do that. Okay. If they give you pushback, right, now you present them new options based on the feedback. If they say, nah, none of those work for me, man, that's a little bit too much. Okay, not a problem. Let me build out a couple more options. What would be comfortable? What's a good number? Did you have a different number in mind? Blah, blah, blah. Now maybe you present them two more options. You say, okay, so based on your feedback, based on what you told me, I built X and Y, for this amount and this amount. And then again, you pitch it the same way. Is this one or this one more comfortable for you? You don't say, do any of these work? You pitch it as options, not yes or no, because no is way easier to say than an explanation of why these won't work for them after they just told you why they need it. Okay. So if they give you objections, always try to overcome them by using their exact words and goals against them. That's why earlier on I said it's so important to get ammunition so that you can use for closing them, because if they say, I don't need this, you say, yeah, you do. And here's why, because you just told me this. Okay. So be assumptive, right? By saying things like, since tomorrow is never promised, and because you are saying that you can comfortably afford this and that you need this, I'm at least going to get the process started by getting you pre-qualified by submitting an application. Okay. The good news is you're not paying anything today. All we're doing is locking in your age and health so that if, God forbid, something were to happen to you tomorrow, you would not need to worry about your family being protected. The good news is that we can be as flexible as you like when it comes to making the first payment. If you end up deciding that this was not the right move, we can always withdraw the application anytime without you being charged. Okay, these things take time, so it's very important that we start the process as soon as possible. So that's what we're going to do. Again, you be assumptive, okay? The reason you want to be assumptive is not because you're being manipulative or you're trying to scam people out of money. It's because 9 times out of 10, people do not want to help themselves. They want to think about it and not do anything about it, because even though they're totally in a position to be able to afford this, they 100% totally need this. Oftentimes people are lazy and they will never just get things done. Okay, people procrastinate, people are lazy. So sometimes you have to push them as a professional with their best interest in mind. Very important. Be assumptive, but don't be a dick. Okay. Be assumptive to help them. All right. Just like I said, you go straight into the application, be as fast as possible. You should already have the application, everything pulled up. So there's, no time for them to second guess themselves. Okay. So that's it, guys. That's the entire, life insurance sales flow that I use for basically every single sales call that I get on now. Whether you sell IULs or whole life or term or mortgage protection, whatever you do, this will help you. So what I recommend is watch this video a few times, take notes, and really memorize every single aspect, every single section of this, so that when you get on your next sales call, you don't need to think, you don't need to watch this video, you don't need to have anything pulled up. You know this like the back of your hand, so that you can actually start making more money. All right, guys, if you have any questions, please feel free, shoot me a DM, send me a message, whatever. Be more than happy to answer any questions you guys have. Peace.